This is Universal Lunch, Out of Office Uncommon Hours, a limited run live stream web series on the occasion of Futurespective, an exhibition with events and happenings that demonstrate how design inquiry engages in open-ended, extra-disciplinary exchange. Futurespective runs through December 14th at the Institute of Contemporary Art at the Maine College of Art in Portland, Maine. I'm Jimmy Liu in Austin, Texas.
And I'm Gabrielle Espredy in Asbury Park, New Jersey. Futurespective asks a simple question. What does it mean to rethink the past in the present to point to the future? And each Thursday, for the duration of the exhibition, we will gather a diverse group of thinkers and makers to kick around answers to this question relative to design, to culture, or to anything else our guests want to discuss. Jimmy, nice to see you again.
Gabrielle, good to see you again. This is my favorite part of my week.
I know I look forward to it because it means that, for me at least, it means my teaching week is over and I have a few days to shift to more. Okay, I shouldn't say more intellectually stimulating things, but to stimulating things that are different.
Yeah.
Different, not better or worse. How
Absolutely.
have you been this week?
Very cold. Winter has struck in Austin. And by winter, I mean 40 degrees.
Gentle flower.
Yeah, that's a spring day in your area.
Yes, our temperatures plummeted from the 50s into the 20s in the course of one day, which was very exciting. Particularly since, as you know, on a college campus, the kids walk around in cargo shorts and flip-flops, and it was funny to see them all freezing. I felt very much like a middle-aged woman saying, you really shouldn't be walking around without your socks on. But
Children!
So, indeed. Hey, we are past the halfway point in our Universal Lunch web series. Which is amazing and also a little sad to think that we're kind of past that hump.
Yes.
But it's a moment to sort of reflect on the past and think about the future, since we still have a number of episodes yet to go.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've definitely gotten, I feel like this. I don't know if it's the actual reality, but I feel like I've learned so much about being a host and also interviewing. I mean, some weekends I'm being a masochist and I just watch our episodes.
Wow.
And, self-critique a little.
Is that masochism or narcissism?
A little bit, probably a little column A, a little column B, Yeah, but mostly masochism. I'm trying to learn and improve. Yeah, I mean, what do you think? What do you think of what we've done so far?
Like you, I've learned a lot about the kinds of questions to ask. And also recognizing that, particularly because many of our guests are themselves pedants in the best sort of way, that you really only need the mildest prompt to get folks going. And I think that's actually been really, really exciting. I've been thrilled to learn a lot. Taking notes and then realizing I don't need to take notes because I can just go back and listen to it again. So that's
the magic of the internet.
The magic of the internet. Yes. It's also reminded me again of how valuable these questions are and these conversations. Many years ago, I had a colleague who was teaching down in Baton Rouge, and we were on an editorial board together, and she made the observation that when she sort of became a professor, she thought that faculty meetings were going to be this place where you had these amazing, stimulating conversations, and then she realized that they were not that at all.
Right.
And so it was so important to find this other place in our editorial board meetings that you had that space. And I feel like one of the things that's been so great about Universal Lunch is it's another one of those spaces where you can just have those great conversations with people you know, with people you want to know better, with people you don't know but know their
admire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been the best. That's been the best part.
Yes, and I was talking offline with Jan Abrams, who was like, "You guys really need to continue this." And
well, I suppose we could continue it on a monthly basis,
right? I mean, it's like a kind of it's a lot of work to produce like a series like this, and even the minimal once a week. 2 to 3 guests each time. Still, that's like an incredible amount of work for even 2 people.
Yes, and lining everything up, and then I mean, not that we're complaining.
Not at all.
Vast audience. We are thrilled to be doing this. And
our millions of subscribers. What are you talking about?
Millions, yes, millions. I just checked, and I think that only Michelle Obama has more followers than we do.
I know. How did we do it? We're amazing. I am real excited today to talk to 2 of these people together. 2 of people I really admire. And now we can have them together. That's kind of exciting.
Yes, and I think it's also important to let our viewers know that we are changing things up a little bit this week, and we're going to try a new format where we're just having 2 guests, and we're going to speak to each of them individually and then bring them together for what we hope will be an exciting joint conversation. Though I have a feeling you and I will be able to just sit back and enjoy their
and bask in their intellectual glory. And also, I should point out to our viewers that Ian Lynam will be joining us from Japan in the early hours of tomorrow. He's joining us kind of from the future. And so huge props to him. I hope he took a nap. I hope he got a nap in. We'll ask him when he comes on.
Yeah, or perhaps he's just drinking really strong coffee or tea to just kind of keep him going. Today's theme is a broad one. We want to talk both about education and writing. And we're going to talk to our guests about how they see an intersection between their teaching and their writing in terms of their larger practice. And we're also, of course, interested in this larger notion of the role of the critic and criticism. And I think one of the things that, Jimmy, you and I have been thinking about is our own positions relative to being critics, both in terms of design or in terms of culture in general. I like to think of myself as a cultural critic in some way.
So yes, when we were writing up our description of this project, you very generously snuck in Jimmy Lou, educator, critic. And I was like, well, it's real generous of you. And I don't know I don't know where I feel in relation to that term as a critic. I think I have criticisms, but what? Yeah, right. I am critical. And I can't wait to get into a discussion about critique with Ian today. But yeah, I don't know what is it? Am I a critic because I call myself one?
Well, yes. Bruce Nauman, right? Bruce Nauman said he was an artist, so everything he did in his studio must have been art. If you have students pin up work and you critique it, by definition, you're a critic. One could also argue that any of us who occupy, shall we generously call it non-normative space, spend much of our time critiquing the status quo and the dominant culture.
Through our practice.
Yes. Particularly when we have our hands on our hips and are being outraged by something that the dominant culture has done. I think
It's a natural position for me.
But that's to my point, right? It is in fact a natural position of anyone who stands outside the dominant or normative position in any of their spaces, right? Whether that's the academy, whether that's one's personal life and sexuality or race or ethnicity, however you're choosing to position yourself relative to the dominant culture, I think if you are outside of that in any way, I think critique becomes a way of knowing and experiencing the world.
I like that position kind of democratizes that word, like critic. And I think, it seems very empowering for to also encourage others in those positions to think of themselves actively as critics.
Yes, but, I suppose in an improv sense, I'm supposed to say yes and.
Yeah.
Except this is going to be a but. We also know that we are in a moment right now relative to earlier, let's call them canonical forms of criticism in which everybody gets to be a critic. The art critic, the movie critic, the food critic, whether it's in a positive way because of what's the where they give tomatoes to movies?
Rotten Tomatoes.
Rotten Tomatoes, right? Whether it's Rotten Tomatoes or Yelp or anything. And while on the one hand that's great, the other danger, I think, is that we may be in a position in which any kind of expertise and authority ends up potentially being seen as less important. Everyone is an expert. If everyone is a critic, why do we need critics?
Well, we need, if everyone's a critic, there are better critics and worse critics. Right?
Hierarchy.
They'll sort themselves out. The crowd will sort them out.
Well, yes, there's always that hope that somehow the crowd will.
Yes, that is
all out. But I do think that's it is a really interesting moment when, and I know myself, I discover music and books and all kinds of things through forms of criticism that normally, just through the multiplication of outlets for criticism, rather than, if I didn't read it in the New York Times, then it must not exist.
Yes.
So, it is interesting though. And yet there's a kind of commonality. I had been it was when I was in Portland for the Convivium, and I got home and went immediately from the airport to join a bunch of friends for dinner. And somehow I mentioned that I was going to Chicago the next week and that we were going to a steakhouse for dinner. And that brought up the recent Pete Wells review in the New York Times of Peter Luger, which is one of the oldest restaurants in the country and one of the oldest steakhouse. And he basically trashed it. And so it was kind of great that everyone in the room had read that review.
Yes.
And everyone was ready to jump in. And
you're keeping great company.
Well, yes.
Like.
or that this is just a bunch of gay New Yorkers on a Sunday night are gonna.
Like I said, you keep great company. I want to get on to our company that we're keeping today. Yes, shall we?
Indeed. Let's welcome Ian Lynam, who works at the intersection of graphic design, design education, design history, and design research. He is a faculty member at Temple University, Japan, a faculty and former co-chair at the Vermont College of Fine Arts in the MFA in graphic design program. He was a 2019 visiting critic at the California Institute of the Arts, better known as Cal Arts. And that was also in the MFA in graphic design program. And he is also faculty at the Meme Design School in Tokyo. He operates the Tokyo-based design studio Ian Lynam Design. He writes for Idea Japan and Slanted in Germany, and has published a number of books about design. He operates the Type Foundry publishing house, distributor, and occasional software venture WordShape, and is one half of the research and curation unit Corinthian. And a cat person. Ian, welcome.
Ian, welcome.
Hi. How are you guys doing?
Just fine.
Good.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really nice. I really appreciate it. And it's great
How
to
are
meet
you holding up?
I'm sleepy.
All right, then we're gonna get this conversation going so that you will not get sleepy.
Okay. Right on.
So Jimmy, should I jump in with that first question?
Yes, let's do it.
Right.
Let's go.
So at Universal Lunch, we are interested in the work that you are doing currently, which we'll get to, but we're also really interested in the ideas that feed that work. And so we'd like to start by asking you to trace a line backwards through your education and through any other formative experiences, institutions, or people who shaped what we will call, maybe you wouldn't describe it this way, your particular school of thought. We're wondering if you want to talk a little bit about perhaps punk with respect to the way you see your approach, and anything else you'd like to tell us about how those perspectives and vantage points might have informed who you are as a designer.
Okay, cool. So I've been involved in assorted subcultural scenes, including like punk, post-punk, hardcore, noise, and other stuff since 1986, largely through making zines, and then also playing in a handful of pretty dubious bands sprinkled throughout. I don't know, I was and I am into like very different things, like sonically and aesthetically. And I don't know, I remember a bunch of years ago trying to sort it out. I was talking to a friend and I made some offhand comment about hippies. And he was like, buddy, slow your roll. Like, you know, hippie is just another word for counterculture. And I was like, oh, you're right. So, and then kind of, I don't know. So just kind of like my thinking around subculture really has another name, which is humanism. It's really an extension of the 60s belief that music and cultural production, you know, they were engines for free thinking, for political engagement, dissent, and not just entertainment or commodities. So, I don't know. I mean, I think the music I was into then and a lot of the music I'm into now has an ethical dimension and a moral imperative. So, and really of liberation and social change. Yeah, I mean, I think that was a big thing. But like, there's this anthropologist named Benedict Anderson, yeah. And like, he talks about like imagined communities. And I think punk is kind of that as well. You know, it's the kind of thing, you know, like I was born in 1972. Punk kicked off in 1977 or, you know, 76, according to some narratives. So like, I don't know, I couldn't be a kindergarten punk rocker. So, you know, being active in those scenes, you know, starting in the late 80s, running and becoming more heavily involved as I got older in the 90s. I don't know, you know, it was imaginary. And I really like that kind of this idea of actually bringing imagination to life.
And did you, as you were kind of coming into punk and thinking through kind of punk as community, was it initially just music, or from the beginning were you engaged with both music and graphics through zines, etc.?
Initially, it was like through zines. Mm-hmm. So I got my first zines in like 1985, and I was like, "Ooh, I want to do that." So started doing that, and then like music. I mean, I was getting into music at the same time, and it was really just both. So yeah, and then like I don't know, I was really into zines for years and years and years and years, and then. You know, I thought what I was doing was called layout. I didn't realize it was graphic design until 1997. So I just had this very technical view.
Place that in a year. Like you're like, yes, I had that realization in 1997.
Is that because you started grad school?
No, that's because I was living in the Bay Area through the first .com boom, and all the graphic designers I met were terrible people. So I wanted nothing to do with them. And I mean, I was just making my own stuff and like working at Kinko so I could get free printing so I could make the zines. So, but then I wound up moving up to Portland, Oregon, and I met a graphic designer who was a punk guy. His name's Richard Jones. He has CMYNK tattooed on one of his knuckles. And he's a fabulous individual, and he kind of took me under his wing and like showed me design stuff, and I was like, I'm going to go back to school, and I did it. So then undergrad,
Nice.
yeah.
So how did that kind of punk ethos sit with you, like through your various forms of education? Like, how did it manifest? Did it sit well? Did it brush against what you were being taught?
Totally brushed against at first, like I felt like, the notion in, the late 90s was like, I don't know, it didn't really feel like there was room for punks in design other than in the Pacific Northwest, Art Chantry, other than him. So it was just kind of like, I don't know. So I had this imposter syndrome for a while, then figured it out. And then I went to grad school shortly thereafter at Cal Arts, and was just like, I think, it's okay. It's going to gel together. And then shortly after that, moved to Tokyo, and then really kind of philosophically and kind of spiritually re-engaged with, kind of the spirit of DIY stuff. So, yeah.
And in the Pacific Northwest, was there, one tends to think in that moment of the sort of grunge scene, was there a kind of graphic overlap at all between punk and grunge relative to zines and posters and anything else?
Yeah, I mean, like, at that time, there was, I mean, like, I don't know, like, the grunge thing was something like I just really looked at with disdain, like, I moved up from the Bay Area, like, shortly after bands like Green Day signed to major labels, which was, like, the end. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I don't know, like, so, yeah, I was just more interested in, like, there's a guy, Sean Teherachi, he does a clip art zine called Crap Hound, and he was making really amazing work. And there's always been a very vibrant DIY self-publishing scene in Portland that really, really attracted me. So, yeah, I think like that more than any kind of connection to grunge music per se. Portland at that time, pre what it is now, was fiercely, fiercely independent for the most part. So in terms of the scene I was involved, or scenes that I was involved in. So, yeah.
So Ian, I want to get to talking about your practice, your current practice. So you teach at two schools, at least two schools on at least two different continents. And you run a publishing imprint, you run a commercial design practice, you write regularly, and you produce media. And you are also seemingly a pretty awesome human being. That was you as a list. How do you conceptualize your practice as not a list?
I mean, I think just kind of like, from, like, I don't know, like when I was really young, I was like the head of this anarchist youth chapter in New York, and I was really into that. And then like, just kind of like what I took away from anarcho-syndicalism and like what I took away much more recently from like American pragmatism and humanism, just kind of, like as an educator, I'm really interested in, just helping people, like I hope that the people that I work with in educational situations, some kind of socioeconomic advantage comes out of our working together, as a result. Like I always think about the political and economic dimensions. I have a minor in political economy, so that's like super duper important to me. And then just like, really just people being able to express themselves and like, I don't know, feel better about themselves, like a cathartic, pro-social dimension. Like that's my interest as an educator. Same thing with cultural and commercial work. It's, I try to involve myself in things that are interesting, on multiple levels. So I think, outside of the things that I do, I mean, there is a pretty big sense of ethics and morality there. So
that sounds like you were kind of engaged with political philosophy and perhaps critical theory prior to becoming a designer.
Yeah, but it was more like, Bakunin and stuff that like has very like pretty minimal relevance to graphic design, in terms of applied graphic design. So
right.
Yeah. But some, I mean, grad school, that's where I learned the stuff. So
ruins us all.
That's good. Grad school is great.
What was your time at Cal Arts like?
It was great. I mean, just really, I had an okay undergrad experience, but I really needed to be taught. I needed to learn, and I got loads of criticism and design history and just loads of conversations. Yeah, it was lovely. It was wonderful. I have the utmost respect for the Cal Arts faculty, and I'm really excited to be teaching alongside of them this year. It's really great. So, yeah.
And was there sort of one thinks about Cal Arts as being a very free-form kind of education? Was that aside from the content being different, was that very different from your undergraduate experience?
Undergrad was way more kind of rigid, but Cal Arts has structure. There is a lot of structure there, so that was really, really helpful. It's not you're not just off doing your own stuff. You meet up every week with the faculty, and there are studio classes, there's history class, there's theory class. We're not just like spinning your wheels on your own. So just good structure, at least for me at that point, and still today, is really important. So yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the writing workshop that you run, which is called Doof Doof?
Yep. So
what does that mean?
Okay, all right. So in Australia, they have another name for techno music, which is doof doof. Just doof 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 doof.
Oh, right.
So, okay, I get it.
Doof
okay.
doof, yes.
Yeah, and I
thought perhaps it was Japanese.
No, no, just I don't know, it's a really stupid word, and I love they just have another word for it. I mean, and it's like doof doof's like slightly different in some scenes than North American or European techno, and I just like words. So that's the whole thing. It's just like, all right, I like that word. It's super silly, so I'm just going to use that. And it's the workshop's really about overcoming designers' fear of writing through embracing language making, visual language, and examining discursive structure. So it's really meant to just empower people to not be afraid of writing, to grapple with it through individual exercises that are not, there are individual exercises that are not shared, individual exercises that are shared, there are group exercises, and just trying to peel away, what is at the very core of any thesis, the set of questions or ideas behind a convincing piece of writing. And it could be around any sector of cultural production. It's just, I happen to be working in design. So, yeah.
And please, Jimmy.
Oh, and well, I'm curious, how did the students who encounter you in this workshop, how are they responding to I guess in general, the idea of writing, and how do they perform in the workshop? How are they doing?
So I've done 5 of them now at different institutions, and it's been uniformly pretty amazing. I'm there, either as a faculty advisor or thesis advisor. So there is a willingness and a desire to write. And for people that, basically most people are afraid of writing. So we just start off talking about it. All right. So let's talk about the fear. Let's talk about pedagogical damage. The whole idea behind this is to have an absolute minimum of that. And how can we empower ourselves to feel comfortable, at least, writing silly things like lists. Like lists is a big part of the first like eighth of the workshop, and just like learning to like let go and like, I don't know. And then like, how do you configure ideas in a structure around your sector of cultural production? And like, I don't know. Yeah, it seems to work pretty well. I mean, nobody has totally flailed, and it's generated some really great pieces of writing. So a lot of them actually. So I'm pretty excited. Like, I think it's working. So, but.
And is this a pedagogy that you sort of developed on your own as you honed your own craft as a writer?
No, definitely hand in hand with the faculty at Vermont College of Fine Arts and the MFA program. Yeah. We all collectively developed the guidelines for our MFA thesis projects. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So accretively and like over time. So that was really, really important. I mean, the VCFA faculty are the most empathetic, kind, loving, generous group of faculty. So like definitely hand in hand, and like super props to them. They're the best. So yeah.
Well, since you brought it up, I might have skipped over a question.
That's okay.
Well, I was since you brought up Vermont College of Fine Arts, can you tell us about the low residency model? Which I'm just interested in general, but then this came up in my faculty meeting yesterday. We were talking about low residency models. So I'm primed to hear more about the how the model works in graphic design, what kind of students you attract, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Do you want more? Okay, so basically,
let me be more pointed. One of the tensions always in low residency programs for studio-based work is, how do you deal with what we all still valorize as the face-to-face critique kind of in the same room?
Right. Okay, so the way that the MFA program at VCFA is set up is that we meet twice a year, once in April and once in October for a week. That is like summer camp meets boot camp. It's really, really intense. We always have world-renowned lecturers and critics come and visit. Denise Gonzales Crisp, Robert Bringhurst. Just loads and loads of people. Basically, in that week, you have basically a process anti-exhibition called Pin Up for non-graduating students. You have graduating students. We have basically a graduation every semester, so twice a year. We have loads and loads of lectures, workshops, like pretty much every activity that you would normally pack into a standard semester of grad school in a week. And the days are long. We start at 9, we end, the faculty end often at midnight, their days, And then beyond that, there are like kind of therapy sessions. They're not really therapy sessions, but like, powwows with people. Like, where are you going? Where are you at? What's going on? So there's all that. In terms of the student population, we tend to attract older students because of the nature of the model. And just, it's a lot of folks seeking their MFA so they can get a tenure track teaching position. So that type of student kind of steers to be older. So I think that median age, I stopped being co-chair a couple of years ago, so I'm not in on the like numbers right now, but it was right around 37.
Oh, wow.
So it's totally different. Mm-hmm. And then
are they maintaining a full-time job while they're doing this, most of them, or do you have a sense of that?
Yes, most are. So that's the whole thing that's lovely about it. So basically we have these residencies, and in between, basically, I and other faculty will work with between 2 to 6 students individually. So they will basically each month generate 100 hours worth of work, submit it to their faculty advisor. We will review it, give them comments. They will read the comments and any like suggested readings, etc. Then we meet up through Skype or Google Hangouts, or I'm going to be in Arizona in December. My parents live there. I'm going to meet up with one of my students in person at that time. And that can be really fun because hopped around the world to meet up with folks just because it kind of aligned with vacations. So yeah, so there's there's that. They get a ton of feedback. We meet for an hour. I'm a little, I don't know. I tend to meet for an hour or 2 hours with folks, and then just try to figure out, what they need, and then start the same processes over the next month. So there we have both a 2-year track and a 3-year track. The 3-year track is for people that come in without a design undergrad or a lot of professional experience. So yeah, and just really amazing educators, really amazing students. I have not witnessed the sense of collegiality and community that is at that program, both among the faculty and among the students and among the mix of faculty and students and staff at any other institution. It is phenomenal. I feel like it changed me as an educator by just, being part of this. I love my fellow faculty. They made me into a better person.
And do you ever...
Go ahead.
Is that the intensiveness of it, do you think, that has spurred that? I mean, obviously the quality of both the people, the students, et cetera, but I'm wondering if there's something about the immersion for the period when you're all in the same place that might contribute to that.
Oh, definitely at first, but then over a sustained period, I've been teaching there for 7 years, all of my relationships with my colleagues have turned into really, really deep friendships, and the same thing, because like when you're a teacher, you can't quote, I'm parroting the words of my colleague Yoon Soo Lee. When you are a teacher, you cannot be like friends with your students because you have your student in thrall. You have power over your student. So we talk about that. We negotiate those relationships. But then after they graduate, they're colleagues and we become friends, and it's awesome. So I really think it is about natural affinity. It's about developing community. A community is a localized economy, right? But the thing is, it's not just a group of people. And if you if you talk about these ideas and you're really, really, really transparent, which usually grad schools are not transparent, I don't know, everybody's in it together. And it feels like we're all in the struggle. So I gave an introduction speech at the last commencement, and what was the point?
Hard to know which is which when it only lasts a week.
Sorry?
Hard to know whether it's a convocation or a commencement if it's a week.
Yeah, it's just always like the commencement at the end. So, and I lost my train of thought. So, sorry.
Ian, I'm curious about so when it works, it seems like it works quite well. And everyone is awesome and lovely, and the students are happy. Have there been instances, or where in the model is an opportunity for it to not work? Like when does it feel like this is not working? This aspect of it is not working. Have you experienced any of that? And what is it? Where are the kinks?
I think there are a number of kinks that happen. It may be a lack of commitment on the part of the student. It may be just like economic resources on the part of the student. That's a big thing. Time management is huge. Because this is a low residency program, you have to be very present to do the work, in your home studio. So, and if you are not present, that's going to unravel really, 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 really quickly.
Well, how do you deal with that when they're not face to face? How do you, if someone's not putting the work in, what do you do?
Bug them.
I know what I do when they're here face to face,
Right. I think, my level of engagement, I always tell students, anytime they need something, they can text me. And that's something, text me or call me or whatever, or email me. I am here. And when people start disappearing, I just start reaching out. And 80% of the time that solves it. But the thing is, I don't know, I haven't, it's been a number of years since I've experienced any problems. But that's just grad school. People fall through the cracks all the time. That's any experience, So Yeah, I mean, but that's part of education, right? I mean, like, how do you guys deal with it?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, I think like I don't know, like I feel like we face it more and more all the time with undergrads today.
Yeah.
That it's and I don't think it's for a lack of desire on their part. Like, I think all of our students want to do well and they want to be here, but I think a lot of them are dealing with like personal issues, mental health issues, economic issues that, or like, you know, like I teach at a very expensive private school. And I think my students sometimes like they have to have a full-time job. And so I think a lot of it is trying, we have a phrase that we say a lot, like meet them where they are. And so I try to meet them where they are. If that means that, you know, they're struggling to just, you know, come to class, you know, like I have to have a lot of, what do you call empathy? Lots of empathy. Lots of emotional labor, as we say.
No, I mean, it's the same with my undergrads. I mean, and I think like the role of technology in the contemporary moment, I'm not sure if anybody's theorized it like this, but like, I mean, we're really in the moment where like Foucault's notion of the panopticon has come true, you know, like, you know, there is this like, I don't know, it's just super gnarly and students viscerally feel it. And the thing is they grew up with it, so they don't know what the hell is going on. So it's just like, and it's just like, hey, chill, you know, and like try to like theorize it, explain, I mean, that aspect, because it creates like, I mean, it's schizophrenic. So, yeah. How about you, Gabrielle? How do you deal with that stuff?
I think I teach at a public university, and yet the students have exactly the same issues because they are overwhelmed by the credit load that they're carrying and don't really have difficulty figuring out how they prioritize. And so, as Jimmy was describing, they just start to disappear. And so again, it's just engagement, reaching out constantly, trying to get them in front of you and having that conversation. I had a student come in yesterday, again, unprompted, but this kind of classic transferred in architecture undergrad, didn't know where to begin in terms of how to get any of his work done. And so to your point, the point you made earlier, I said, you got to start making a list and you have to start thinking about workflow and break every project down into its constituent elements and then just start chipping away. And also the other thing that I thought was useful, and I'm sure this is true for your low residency students, don't think that you're going to get everything accomplished in a set period of time or that you can work nonstop on one project. He's like, I'm going to devote all of Saturday and Sunday to this. And I said, that's actually not a really good idea. You know?
True that. Totally.
So I do think it's important to, it's so important to articulate these kinds of struggles that the students are having and to explain to them that we relate to them, right? That we have the same struggles ourselves in terms of our
own. For real. For real. I'm like always struggling.
Yeah.
Ian, I want to get to talking about one of your publications before we have to get Denise on the call. So a recent publication that you're making that I haven't had a chance to read yet is called Critique. It's about critique. And in it, it looks like you're not only talking about critique, but you're also critiquing the field and the academy. Can you tell us a little bit about the motivation for making the publication and also a little bit about the contents?
Sure. So the backstory is that a book came out, I believe it was last year, and it's called Crits, a student handbook. And
I've seen it.
It's terrible. It's not written for students. Half of it is not about critique. It's not applicable to students. It's for fellow educators. The tone is stodgy. It's unrelatable. So I was just like, this sucks. And also, like, I learned nothing from it. And like, I put it in front of a couple students, and they were just like, "Ooh, this is terrible." And I was like, "All right, cool. Like, you know, let's." I don't know. It just got me thinking. Like, all right, like I can do this better. So I just made a zine about it. It's about critique and how critique relates to criticism, but also because it's very intentionally, obviously, for students. I like unpack semiotics in there. What else do I do? Some other stuff. Just talking about context. Talk about the notion that talent is innate, how that is bullshit. And then I don't know, just like why do we critique? Like, what are the reasons for it? And then what are the forms of critique that we see in school very often? Then also advice, not just for students, but for educators as well. I mean, subjective, from my subjective viewpoint, like if you're gonna have a crit with your students, perhaps before that crit, you sit down and you talk about like, what are all of the, design principles, or what are we looking at that are going to help guide the critique. So yeah, I think that's
is that like, do you think that that's like an issue in the discipline? Because like oftentimes I find that like when I meet designers who are in practice, like I mean specifically graphic designers, I will say, is that it occurred to me recently that it's like I don't think some of these people have ever experienced a fulfilling or I guess I'll call it a fulfilling and thoughtful critique. Like It's never been modeled for them.
Right. I mean, that's my experience. I mean, as great as all the teachers I have been, like it was always very hazy and unclear, what are the intentions and what is the framework that we're using to critique the work? And it's the kind of thing like you shouldn't, if you're paying, a little bit of money or a lot of money to go to school, like there should be a clearer framework and structure. And that's really, really important. And that's also like emotionally, in a non-manipulative way, how you get students on your side. It's like literal, actual dialogue, So like, wow, it's And I'm just trying to like, I don't know, like, I've been teaching for a bunch of years now, and I'm just trying to like, just be a better teacher and writing this stuff and externalizing it. It's language that's like edited and it's creative, and it's about putting that together, and just like. It helps me really kind of like enhance and focus my pedagogy. So, and like vocalize it. So
I think it's so both interesting and incredibly useful to make transparent and explicit these things that one takes for granted. So the critique as a pedagogical tool, in the same way studio as a pedagogical tool also needs to be explained. In the same way a lecture course, I think we have a tendency to just assume that these models are somehow comprehensible, whereas it makes great sense to actually do that, particularly for the thing that is so fraught, the crit.
Yeah, totally. I think, just like making sure, letting people know that like so the etymological base of critique is crisis. And it's about putting the work in crisis, not the person in crisis. And like saying that before every crit, because like no matter what, and I'm a chill teacher, like I tend to have really good intense, I think, what I try to bring to the table intellectually, but in terms of like empathy and relatability, in that way, I believe I'm pretty chill. And just trying to provide a framework so you can communicate it as effectively as possible in classroom scenarios. So.
Yeah, and that's even more important when, you spoke earlier about the power dynamics implicit in the student-teacher model, and when there's a gender imbalance, that also becomes problematic.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and so again, focusing that it's that it's about the work and not the person, seems so important. Which I think is something that Denise Gonzales Crisp can also relate to and comment on. particularly interestingly enough, in terms of transparency in our pedagogical tools. Maybe we'll be able to get her to talk about something called dynamic syllabus that she's been working on. And
intriguing.
So perhaps we should now invite Denise to join our conversation.
Okay. And Ian, are you going to stay on, or you can also take a nap break? Okay.
No. I'll stay on.
You can take a disco nap if you would like.
Power nap.
All right. Oh, I am so excited to introduce our next guest. Denise Gonzales Crisp is a graphic designer, design writer, educator, and curator located in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Los Angeles, California. As professor in the College of Design at North Carolina State, she has served as the director of the Master of Graphic Design program since 2015. Denise authored Graphic Design in Context, Typography, 2012 from Thames and Hudson in the UK. Other writings and design works are widely published in European and US publications. Denise's current focus is on the uses of situated and improvisational methods in design education, inspired in part by her role as a design inquiry participant and board member for 9 years. DI Futurespective is the second museum exhibition she has co-curated. The first, Deep Surface, Contemporary Ornament and Pattern, was an inaugural year exhibition co-curated for the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh. Denise holds a BFA from Art Center College of Design and an MFA also from Cal Arts. Denise Gonzales Crisp, welcome to Universe.
You know, I didn't hear a word you said. This thing isn't working. I'm kidding. That's like a dad joke or something, right? Anyway, yes, I'm so happy to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me as the surprise guest. And I'm so pleased to see Ian again. And loved hearing you talk about your work. And it's just, yeah.
The invitations go in multiple directions.
Yeah, I like it. It's part of the improv of Universal.
It is part of the improv, and I was saying to somebody today earlier about, and this is in relationship to like when the I guess relationships you have with students. And I'm having to be teaching 23 students right now in a graduate level course, studio course, which is outrageous. So we have to do a lot of collaborative work, and we just finished. The reason I'm here, by the way, I'm sitting in a gallery that the students worked on here while I was at the ICA in the residency. And it's sort of the mess that emerged out of the messiness of 18 people working together. And I realized that when we talk about collaboration, and this is also in relation to critique, because there's a lot of peer critique in collaboration, or peer responsiveness, maybe is a better way to put it. And I realized collaboration isn't all sweetness and light. Collaboration is actually a disruption. And that's actually what makes it work, is that if you come, the only thing that makes it work is if everyone in the space is there understanding that they're going to be derailed, or you know, that the beat is going to go off to the right 1 degree, and then you're going to end up completely somewhere else. So we're seeing that, and I thought I'd sit in this space. So you're going to be seeing people coming back of about 20 feet from the bathroom, so you may hear a toilet flush occasionally. And then, of course, it happens that on this very day they're doing some work, you know, like on the other side of this gallery. So that's where I am.
I wonder how is collaboration at its best then is sort of a form of therapy.
Well, I think it's a combination of things, right? Like that should certainly be a part of it. Meaning, and when you say therapy, I think I respond to that as in, you know, talk therapy, where you people have the freedom to state where they, you know, what they're feeling about something, or feel frustrated, or, and that definitely is a part of it. It's just that it happens simultaneously during the process. So, yeah, but I'm not a therapist, so I have found myself in positions at times during this whole process where I'm like, shit.
Hey,
Denise,
this is a family-friendly
sorry.
live stream.
I want to start with a little bit of therapy-esque questioning for
Okay.
you. So I want to ask you about, again, here we're interested in not just the work, but the ideas and the experiences that feed that work. And so I'm really curious if you're able to kind of trace a line backwards through your education or your formative experiences with institutions or people, because I think you have a really particular school of thought that's exciting and I'm interested in. What can you tell us about how your particular perspective as a designer, plus other things, was formed?
I don't know. I think of the trajectory as being like, the continuous now. Like I don't background. Like Ian was talking about going to college and being involved in, the scene world and music world and all that. I mean, of course I had that, but in a much more pop kind of way. I mean, I was a 70s chick, and then I was first a hippie chick, and then I was a disco chick, and then I was a 80s chick. So I definitely sort of flowed with the whatever. And so I guess the real turn might have been when I finally just kind of got fed up about where the trajectory was going, and that I had been in my work, that all that sort of what you call it, or I think you used the word, I don't know what it is. It's like a resistance, and I think that's something that Ian and I certainly have in common. It's that mine came out in much more subversive ways that was not overt. And so having to do that subversively actually makes you very crafty, right? Very, very sly. And so figuring out how to not get around things, but do it differently, despite the fact that somebody's telling you to do it in one way or another. I once had a faculty member, a teacher, tell me for a class I'd done all of this kind of background work, and then it was a very complex, I think it was a magazine I was designing, and I had like every meaning down. And so I'm describing this to faculty as I'm going through the work. And he turns to me and he says, you think too much. Okay, then, how not to be in the world?
Do you think that was partially sexist?
I don't know. If I didn't think about that at the time. I doubt it from this particular professor, but I think it was more this capitulation to what they think you need as a professional designer, which is, I've never appreciated that. I mean, I think in part was the fact that it's word and image, that it's everywhere, that you can make really beautiful things, but they're ephemeral. You don't have to. You're not going to kill anybody doing it, typically. In other words, it was a very sort of malleable thing. So the other key moment I would say would be the Macintosh. Like I took a Photoshop class in. I was designing, but I took a Photoshop class in 1984, 1985. It was 1985 because the postscript when I went into the studio for my class, the first emigres were sitting there, and I felt like I'd landed on like my planet. I'm like, what is this? I need to do this. And those letter forms, really? Are you allowed to do that? And then as soon as I got onto the computer and saw the immediacy and experienced the malleability of something that had been taught to me as being so sacred as typography, I was like, I didn't look back after that. I'm still a digital utopian, and despite all the bad things.
Design as resistance.
Sort of, and I think that's maybe why I ultimately ended up really being in academia, because I have the luxury of not having to deal with, the kind of everyday questions. And in fact, I think I'm interested in education not because I'm interested in education as a practice. I'm interested in how education can change the culture of design. I'm much more interested in that. So I even do that with my undergraduates, although respectfully knowing that they're on a different path than my graduate students.
Mm-hmm. So part of the way you were describing some of those formative experiences also bring up something that Jimmy and I had been thinking about, which is that in your written work, and I think also in your design work, there's a kind of attractive balance between maybe slight irreverence and seriousness. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, if you sort of concur with that? And
yeah, I can. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please.
Okay, I can identify with Ian when he was saying, you feel like a poser, like, right? So it's if you have that poser syndrome, and I didn't feel that I necessarily knew how to write. I was told that might be another point at which somebody at grad school, I was taking a course from a writer, and I was hemming and hawing about this and that, and he said, "You can write, just shut up and do it." And
so
which was
stop
nice.
thinking and shut up.
Stop thinking and shut up. Anyway, but because I guess I'm not professionally trained in that the only thing I have to go to is what is a voice, like how I write. I mean, I have always written in the sense that, in fact, at one point I thought I wanted to be like a novelist, but didn't seem possible to do. But I see it as the same way. It's like words and typography are simultaneous occurrences to me. So my writing, I would say, is I'm very aware of the form of the writing, meaning the words themselves. Like Ian, I love words, and the turn of phrase to me, it's like it's composing, and then I guess the irreverence, because I'm kind of basically irreverent when it comes down to it. So.
And would you say that you are, and maybe this is a silly question, but because maybe it's more like a kind of Kinsey scale, but are you a designer who writes or a writer who designs?
I think I'm a designer who writes. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want to I have great respect for people who spend so much time doing that primarily, and people have taken the time to really, really understand, and it's a daily practice. And so for me, it's not that. It is in other ways. Like I do a lot of writing in class, mm-hmm. on my syllabuses as they're going. So that's a project, but it's a design project as much as a writing project. And the form of that syllabus matters to me. In that case, it takes prominence over prose, let's say. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say designer who writes.
Although it's so interesting because, of course, writing is a form of design.
Yes, of course, yes. And, especially if, like Ian was talking about structure, that's a central attribute of design. That's the go-to thing. That's the first thing you start thinking about is the structure in a context, the structure with the user, etc.
Denise, like I want to kind of dig into when I first encountered your writing, I was really struck by how different it was than all the other design writing. Primarily by men that I had encountered in life, and there was a kind of refreshing attitude in your voice? Like, can you do you think about that in like your writing as in relation to the existing, body of writing that's out there in design? Like, for example, your essay in Lorraine Wild's book about California design.
Louise
Sandhouse. Louise Sandhouse. Sorry. In Louise's book about California design, like your essay is kind of like, can you describe that essay a little bit for our audience?
California Girls. It's
yes.
So I was asked to write an essay for this, and it was about women in LA, women in California, who kind of came up. You could call it maybe the first line of the kind of women coming up. So Sheila Lorente Bretville, who also did the women's, is it the Women's Center? I always get it wrong. Anyway.
House.
The Women's House, yes. And then up north, Barbara Stauffacher Solomon was doing work. And then there's a second generation that kind of starts then with immigrants, like we call them, like April Bryant came from New York because she had more freedom to work in doing the things she wanted to do in California. So there are 7 or 8 women. Louise had done a lot of interviews with them. And I thought, I'm not a historian. I can't talk about these women. I know of them, and I knew of them when I was coming up. And April Greiman was like my hero. And so the first thought was, how do I get these people into a space? So for some reason, I thought of this idea that somehow they all meet in the very middle of California. So it's a story of the various ways that these 7 women get to this place that is exactly 500 miles south and 500 miles north of San Francisco and LA, respectively, and kind of this magical thing that happens when they're together. And it's around the idea of Edison, who in this book, I'm writing it as a voice of a 20-something-year-old design recent graduate of inventors that just see the sort of magic of invention and imagination. So it's an attempt to sort of point to that attribute of these women who came up unusually as women in graphic design and other disciplines.
Why is that approach to writing about history? It's different, right? You're not writing like in a voice of a historian. It's kind of a magical, mystical adventure. Like, why is that important to exist in the canon of design writing?
Well, according to my essay from 19... I did actually write an essay that was published in Design and Culture called Discourse This. As in, discourse. Oh, sorry, I thought this was... Anyway, and noted there's a history of people doing this, of designers writing in a voice. And one of the first ones I found, of course, was William Morris, who wrote what was something... Anyway, it's a futuristic story.
News from Nowhere.
Thank you. News from Nowhere. That he's anticipating a future that is far beyond this, blighted 19th century, industrialized, impoverished, sick, smoggy city. And design figures prominently in it. So, so it's a way of imagining potentiality in the same way that we design. So it's a way of prototyping the future. And it's also a way of maybe making a little softer what are ultimately urgent criticisms of the way that we talk about what we do. So I can't wait to read your book on crits, Ian.
I think he might have dozed off temporarily.
No, that's all right. No, he's there.
No, he's just on mute.
I was given the command to be on mute.
The mute command.
Yeah.
Our producer says mute.
He smiles.
So relative to that, can you talk a little bit about how you came to see writing as such an important part of your practice as a designer?
Yeah, I went to college, but I was not much into reading and stuff. I was more into, other things. And
It's a family-friendly show, remember?
Please make a list and send it to us later.
So, and then when I went to Art Center, I took a class from an English professor, and was introduced to this, to fiction, that was my first for reals literature class, and I was like, wow, this is better than the Bible. You can cut that part out if you want.
Or it is the Bible, given that that's literature.
Yes, exactly. Well, the Bible has fabulous stories in it. So I don't know. I think in part because it touches on things that are so much more profound than. I actually think I like writing now and reading almost more than visual arts. I like design better than visual arts. I like how visual arts can surprise, but I think the constraints of design and the constraints of writing are really kind of more interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you, Denise, to do a little reflection. On what is, I think, a pretty huge contribution to the textbook canon, your textbook typography, graphic design and context. It's been out for almost a decade now. We're verging on a decade.
Almost a decade. No.
Yeah, it's true. So I want to know,
did you just flash the image of the cover on the screen? Because I just want to make sure we get that plug in there.
Yeah, right. Like, Kelly, can you find a picture to flash it on the screen, please?
Oh, here, I have one.
Yeah. I have one in my office, actually. No, that's Meredith's book in the back. But I have all of them, the whole series.
Yeah.
So I want to know, what did you hope it would do for the discipline? Because it's quite a different approach to talking about and teaching typography. And what can you tell us about its life out there so far, now that it's been out there for a while?
To answer that one, I think that's an easier question to answer that last one, which is,
okay.
I think it's one of those books that somebody writes and then somebody in 20 years discovers it.
Sure, yes.
How good it is.
Yeah.
And how different it was. And oh my gosh, she was talking about this then, whatever. It's the kind of book I think it's going to be.
Okay.
So it's not doing well in it for a couple of reasons, I think. Not because of the book. I'm very proud of it. But it's touted as a textbook, but it's really a narrative about the uses of typography. And it gives primacy to the fact that typography is never itself a thing. It's always what it is in the context of so many other things, not the least of which is us people reading it, right, with other minds. But definitely when you're designing in a way that you can't really predict how it's going to be. You could predict certain things, but you don't know how it's going to communicate. And so the motivation for the book was to try to get this mindset to be part of how teachers teach type. Mm-hmm. So there's no how-to. So therefore, people do tend to go to Ellen's book or the revised Craig or, one of these that, has these nice lists about how you do it. So in that way, my book is harder. We do have these
primers.
Thank you, that were written by Will Temple and Meredith Davis, which is meant to sort of provide some of that in between the narrative. So, and it's also a book that was meant not to just be read cover to cover. You could pick parts out depending on these categories. So language, materiality. It's been 8 years since I've written that book. I don't
remember. You mean you're not reading it every day?
So I learned a lot doing it, and I use it, with my students, which is a little weird, I have to say, because they're like that's you. But I was given the opportunity to do this book, and then I also was working with the editor, the the editor Meredith Davis, who gave me the freedom to do what I wanted with that. So I was fortunate from the standpoint of me producing something that has something of my qualities, because it was also then chopped up a lot by the Thames and Hudson editor. But it is what there was a little back and forth with the editor who wanted to cut out a word that I had in there, that typography is, you think of typography as typogyroscopic, and he wanted to take that out because there's no such word. I'm like, well, there is now. So
that's what
made it, right? I remember reading that word in there. Yes. It made the final cut.
I made the final cut. That one and the as if factor, but he wouldn't have, I spell it AZIF and he had to spell it ASIF. You give some, you take some. Thanks for asking about it.
You're welcome. Did we get an image up, producer? Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. We did. We got it. We got it up. We got it up for you, Denise.
Now I have to know, was it the Thames and Hudson? I mean, was it the English cover, the British cover, or was it the American cover?
I hope it was the American cover.
Which do you prefer?
The American cover. I just that one.
Okay. Because that other one is shit. Oh, family friendly.
Gabrielle.
Can we before we bring Ian back for a joint conversation? Let's have a brief conversation about education. And you've taught at NC State for a number of years in the graphic design program there, which is a well-established and well-respected program. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what's on your mind now as an educator?
Yes, I do.
Then please, may I that was perhaps too, you answered that as a good witness, that you answered the question I asked. So let me rephrase it and say, Denise Gonzales Crisp, Professor Denise Gonzales Crisp, please talk to us about what's on your mind as an educator.
Okay. So one of the reasons I'm sitting in this space, and I'll just give you, this is this crazy exhibition that 18 of my grad students worked on for 3 days with a person who's in Detroit, Benjamin Gatos, was the person here. And then I was in Portland at the ICA, at the DI Future Spec, Design Inquiry Future Spective, with 5 students. And so we had this sort of simultaneous responsive, thing going back, where we were engaging as designers the space. What's different between there and here is that there we were needing to respond to what was there, and here they were responding to a blank canvas. So two very different things. And I bring that up because the entire semester we have been looking at design processes and design practices, and thinking of practices not just in the professional way we talk about it, but as in, mindfully, how is this practice a part of your design life, of your life? So among those things, the values for me are things like, situated making. I have a saying that consider circumstances as participants. But we tend to just think in terms of people. We don't think about the circumstance, like friends. I now have a toilet over there and a saw over there. Those are now participants in this discussion. And so we've been looking at and trying to, in a way, replace or create, I've been trying to create alternatives for the kinds of methods that are beginning to be codified in the design disciplines, design methods. So, and we kind of know why they're codified. So 2 things. There's a really great book. John Chris Jones, as you know, wrote the Design Methods, and that became sort of the Bible over the years for user experience and for different kinds of design. And then that has been further honed by people like IDEO and et cetera. So there's all these kind of methods. Very few of them deal with things like, I don't know, improvisation or intuition or. So John Chris Jones wrote that book, started in 48 or something. I think it published in the late 50s. Got very popular. In the 90s, late 90s, he published Designing. So it was sort of I don't know if you know of the book, but it's wonderful. In that, it's an entire book that addresses the idea of cybernetics and systems and all of that, but in a holistic way, not in aesthetic. And also the role of chance, of improvisation, of intuition, and kind of backs up a little bit. Like, wait a minute, I wrote this, but I forgot. We've thrown out all this other stuff that's so critical to a creative practice. So that's at the forefront. And so we've read that. We've read Ad Hocism by Charles Jenks and Silver. A lot of it's those impulses. And then I've been steeped in improv in futurespective and part of design inquiry for some time. So that definitely speaks to that. So I'd say right now, the force is trying to think about how can these values that all creative people have, in the sense, until it's kind of kicked out of them into this is how you do it, because that's not only. It's predictive, right? I mean, you just end up designing the same thing. And so that's where my head is in education, how to do that in the classroom. With the graduate students, it's fine because I have, they're mature and I can have these discussions that Ian's talking about, and I don't care if they're sort of bouncing around, right? We talk about that. Undergrads, I've come up with a lot of different critique methods, if you will. They're not really things like I have something called the improv critique and something called the Armando critique that are taken directly from or adapted from certain exercises or improvisational forms, but turning that into a means of call and response. So it's not somebody standing above and saying yes, no. Everybody's saying yes and that's, I've found that to be so much more generative than me telling somebody how to slip in criticism, or rather the critical view, the expert view, as you will. That also changes too, like how in that sort of a circumstance, you can't suddenly just say, okay, well, we had some fun, and now let me just tell you how this is not working.
That might be
you have to have that, but that emerges through the conversation, not me having to say it.
That your description of attempting to reformulate or upend the conventions of critique might be a good moment to bring Ian back into the conversation, since we were discussing that with him.
Yeah.
So Ian, welcome back.
Hi.
Back.
Hello. Hi, Denise. Finally get to say hi to you. It's great to see you.
Can you guys?
I just want to let you two go.
Yes, please. Yes, please. How do you two know each other?
I knew of Ian before, but the first time you and I actually met was at BCFU.
Yep.
How long ago was that?
Ooh. 5 years ago?
5 or 6 years.
Yeah, around there.
And our paths kind of keep crossing. It's a kind of, I think there's a kind of CalArtian thing where there's some sort of weird tether that connects you to everybody who went there. That's probably true of most graduate schools.
Yeah, totally. But
I was expecting you to say like the 80s punk scene and
I
where you met.
Yeah, that Ian was like this little 16-year-old punk and I was like a 50-year-old punk.
Yeah. But I think like in terms of tethers, like very, very briefly after meeting Denise, I really felt like, you know how like astronauts have that airline that connect to the space shuttle. I felt like I had one of those tethers just to her. So like instant affinity. So
I agree.
And as that tether has kind of stretched out, but then sometimes come closer, is it through graduate design education or in other contexts as well?
Pretty much. I mean, a conferences.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know about you, Ian, but I'm kind of trying to rethink that whole conference thing. I think we should chat about how we gather. You know, how educators gather.
Totally.
It's just taking on some of the I'm not going to name anything, but it just seems to be taking on some of the worst attributes of academia. We understand why, you know, I wouldn't fault it. I'm just saying there's other ways.
Yeah.
Wait, can I ask you? Like, I think I understand what those problems are, but can you be more explicit for our viewers? Like, what is your critique of the conference? You don't have to say the specific one, but I'm sure people will.
I mean, I'll just quote what Gabrielle said at the beginning. I don't know, maybe we were talking. Oh, I know, you were talking about Convivium, and she ran this 100. It was a 500-word abstract with a 100-word presentation, and there was so much more conversation around that format.
Right.
And so is the dialogue. It's like Ian, you were talking about what you have with your colleagues. I feel that I have that with some of my colleagues.
Oh, that's great.
Enough that it makes for a nice home. And
I think it's also that, you know, being situated in Japan, I mean, Japanese conferences are very much like North American conferences, where it's just, you know, it's just so formulaic and it's super boring. And if you look at the other end of that, the second to last Brno Biennial in the Czech Republic, and then there was a conference called Schizotopia in Bremen, Germany, 2 or 3 years ago, where it was just like, it was about a dynamic mix of programming, a lot of just improvisational events, like letting the students run the show half the time, you know, and just not like, all right, here's our abstract, let's yell at each other, or not yell at each other, let's just drone, you know, which is most of it.
Or rather than, you know, have a conversation, people stand up and say, here's what I know about what you just told me.
Yeah, totally.
When you always say, was there a question in there?
Right. Yeah, totally.
But, I do think that there is a strain in education, design education in particular, that is happening in Europe, certainly, and I think in certain parts of the U.S., where there's an interest in a kind of more or questioning, I guess, of these, you know, why have we adopted these models that originated, if not in the Bauhaus, in architecture practice? You know, either one is not germane anymore. So,
So speaking of models, I am curious to hear you guys discuss MFA models. Ian teaches at a low residency model, and Denise, you teach at NC State, which I believe has a pretty traditional in-residence model. Yeah. What do you guys think of what each other is doing?
I haven't been to NC State, so it's hard for me to comment. Like I am a big believer in full residency models. I mean, I teach at CalArts as well right now, and like they serve different students and different people's needs. So
yeah, and I think the way that you pointed up the students that do come to BCFU, I think that's a remarkable niche. It's an important thing. It is more egalitarian in the sense that there are a lot of people out there who want that degree or want to spend that time doing it, but just can't. So it's really great, and we're getting more and more like that as well, where our students have to work, and it is sort of questioning the full residency thing because. Truth is, even though ours is extremely affordable by comparison to many other institutions, they have to work. It used to be that there was a demand they had to sit in the studio or be accountable to, 50 hours a week in the studio. It's like, how do you enforce that and why would be my question.
I mean, maybe I can ask the question better this way. Like, what do you envision that graduate education prepares a student to do? Like, is it for teaching? Is it for advanced practice? Like, what should it do? And does that depend?
I think it should be a wider range than it is. In other words, I don't think there's any one path. When I first came here, because of Meredith, who's very basis is about design education, and so that was a major part of the program here, and so a lot of people came here for her. And then I don't know why then I got here, and I'm like, kind of, what am I doing here? And now we're getting a much broader mix. Some are interested in teaching and in an academic setting, so interested in the whole tenure process and all that. And then others are going off to work in labs at Lenovo in their R&D or taking on a senior project something at IBM or whatever. So it's and our program is not unlike BCFU's in the sense that it's agnostic about, like, we don't have the user experience design class, and we don't have even though our curriculum is very much about evidence-based design. Not necessarily now, but
I think
but it's mixed. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Ian.
Thanks. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about graduate graphic design education that that students come to a master's program with a rigorous and robust sense of history and theory. Most of the time they don't. That's where you get that stuff, right? So, I don't know, I think that can be really model agnostic as long as, that is reinforced with the students. And then, just like a certain amount of do you understand connotation? Do you understand denotation? Do you understand synthesis? If you're at a really good place, then can you destabilize it into whatever form of authorship or, agency within society or culture? This dude dancing, he's really good. So,
Ian, do most of your students go on to become educators? Since they're like older students, like you were talking about that earlier?
Probably like 50%. Some folks are just bored. Some folks go on to have.
That's so luxurious,
isn't it though? Just they go to grad school because they're bored, and then I don't know. Some folks are really knee deep in practice, but I think with the low residency model, that's one place where it falls down a lot, because the thing is, in most grad schools, aside from TAing, there's usually not a pedagogical development course. You go to school and nobody teaches you how to teach unless you've got an education degree, right? So, I mean, that's one of the issues with low residency, but at least, the time that we're together, there's some modeling that's being done, and we have, lectures and discussions and workshops and panels about pedagogy and about teaching methods. So,
wow, that's actually really, really interesting, because even there are very few master's programs at any level that do that.
Right.
Even PhD programs. I mean, there tends to be, it's almost as if pedagogy is that dirty little secret, that thing that, we expect you just sort of somehow know how to do it. And I think that goes back to your earlier point of trying to make transparent these pedagogical tools and models that are just so baked into the academy and curricula. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and we're fortunate because, again, Meredith was here, and we've had pedagogy on the books for many years, and she just wrote the book, teaching, it's obviously the word teaching, but graduate or college level design pedagogy. And so that's available for people, but it's also something that is kind of, it covers the extant focus of how we do that, not maybe as open as it might be, but it's a start.
Denise, could you tell us a little bit about, if you're comfortable, about your dynamic syllabus? Because I think that's also an interesting example of making something explicit and visible that generally isn't.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain. The way I can explain it is I use a spreadsheet as almost a canvas. And when we enter a class, the canvas is it has a structure to it, but the canvas is essentially empty. And so it becomes I call it a hub. It becomes the place where all the students and myself sort of participate to respond to what's going into class. I will write prompts as we go in response to what's going on in class. They're now at the point where they're starting to, and it's been a long time, it's very uncomfortable for the students, because can I touch this? It's like, yeah, you can. You can change the whole thing if you wanted to. Why? I don't know, but and they're now starting to feel more comfortable with that, and it's been 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 11 weeks, something. It takes a long time, but so without seeing it, it's kind of difficult to describe. But at one point when I did it last year, or a couple of years ago, about halfway through, I wrote my research questions in the syllabus itself. It had its own tab, and it says, how can the design of a graduate level syllabus model uncertainty and improvisation as desirable and essential attributes of designing? Second question, how can the design of a graduate level syllabus corroborate students' sense of community agency? And the third question, how can the design of a graduate level syllabus visualize collective thought and action on making as central to the circumstances of learning, design, research process? So that I kind of introduced in the middle of the class because it occurred to me because I was doing it. So in terms of my practice, that syllabus becomes, that's my lab. It's a way that I think about teaching. It's a way that I observe how students are interacting with each other and with the content. So that's my research.
So is that primarily for graduate level students, Denise?
So I do it with graduate students, and I do it with undergrads with a little bit more structure.
Okay.
So they have sort of key dates. So they kind of know, and then they have kind of project descriptions, but I do spend quite a bit of time at the front of the class in more workshop-y models to kind of get a looser vibe in the class, I guess. And so they get a little bit more comfortable with it. But yeah, you can't just, you couldn't walk into an undergrad. I'd get a call from 10 mothers, What do you mean? She doesn't know what he's going to do.
What are you teaching them? Where's the syllabus? Is this on the exam?
I have all the university requirements in the syllabus. So.
Great. I want to close our conversation today by asking you both to think aloud with us about geography in relation to your practice, because Ian's in and out of Japan. Denise, you are in Raleigh and Los Angeles. How does where you are play into who you are and your work and the way that you navigate design?
I mean, for me, it's incredibly, incredibly important because I'm existing in two different cultures, and that's really big. And I'm slipping back and forth between two different languages, and they're
Ian, are you fluent in Japanese?
I would say like advanced.
Okay.
You know.
Okay,
so,
you can get by? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Totally. I mean, just, talking about like hardcore epistemology, that's, like, okay. I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah, I've been here for 15 years, so got a pretty good handle on stuff. But I think, I mean, yeah, geography is super important, but I mean, cultural contexts, that's really, 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 really important. And I don't know, it's just like, it's really beautiful to be able to go back and forth between both cultures. And I don't know, just feel really, 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 really lucky in that way. So, yeah.
I've been two different cultures, not quite as dramatic as yours, but I would say that North Carolina and California are definitely different. I guess because I do my teaching here and then I do other things there, I don't feel it quite so much. And I'm in this like hermetically, not sealed, but, hermetic situation of being in a college of design. So that is the location, whether it's here or there is probably more. So I am a little envious of Ian. And also, Ian, it takes a unique kind of person to be able to do that, right? And to be able to negotiate that and have it enrich your life rather than just, drive you crazy.
Yeah. But I think, I don't know, like, I've always been a little messed up, so I don't know. It's good.
Wait, but is that something that you... Yeah, welcome to the club. Is that something that's by design, Ian? Is that something that you consciously were like, I need to live in 2 different countries and teach at 4 different schools? Like, or is that how does that happen? And how did you, like, is that a construction or is that a circumstance?
It's a circumstance that has been nurtured. Once it started happening, when I was invited to teach at BCFA and not just in Tokyo, I was like, oh, wow, this is really great. Like, I don't know, like certain aspects, just as certain aspects of American culture can be quite difficult. The same thing with Japan. And like, just to have your chocolate and your peanut butter is like, ooh, yeah. So, yeah.
Which is which?
I don't know. I mean, you run with it. It's 3:14 a.m.
Oh, God. Indeed. I wonder too, the circumstance, when you mentioned circumstance, I wonder if you're treating them as participants, which is something that Denise suggested earlier.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Full circle.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I think, locale and cultural context are incredibly important. And like, any type of situation that you're in, I don't know, everything will shift, especially if you're jumping back and forth between cultures. And they really, and then also like, how do you view and honor different cultures without stereotyping them? And that's really big. Mm-hmm. I try to think of both, North American culture and Japanese culture. And I work with a lot of international people in Tokyo as well, and just try to honor where everyone comes from. So
that's very great. I don't know if you know this, Ian, but Gail is writing something for the LA culture, your issue an issue that's coming up. Yep. So she wrote me into that. So we'll help you out with that stereotype.
I'm excited.
And that's Gail Swanland for those of you who are watching this episode, who is an artist and designer based in Los Angeles and who teaches at the California Institute of Arts.
Sorry.
And so, this project is the upcoming issue of Slanted magazine from Germany. The theme of that is Los Angeles.
Oh, fabulous!
Nice.
Yeah. When does that come out?
Good question. All the essays are due within the next 24 hours. So, but we'll see. Mine is not.
Go.
So, no.
Yeah,
mine's not going to be on time. You're safe. It's all good. So,
for the students watching this episode, please note that deadlines exist in the real world and they are sometimes fungible, but you didn't hear that from me.
Nor myself. Deadlines are real.
You can edit that.
Ian Lynam and Denise Gonzales Crisp, thank you so much for staying up.
Yes.
And for joining us this week on Universal Lunch. It has been an honor and a pleasure.
Same.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Gabrielle, thank
Wonderful.
you so much.
Thanks
Denise,
to both of
great
you.
to see you as always.
Sorry? Yes, good to see you. Yes. I thought you said at something. Okay.
Okay, hope to see you all in real life soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Thank you guys so much.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Take a nap.
And we're almost out of time, Jimmy. Amazing how quickly it goes by. But next week on Universal Lunch, we will continue our conversation about design and looking in particular at design in terms of space and scale with our two guests, the Jessies, as I can call them. Jessie LeCavalier, who is a designer, writer, and educator whose work explores the architectural and urban implications of contemporary logistics. And Jimmy, you can.
And Jesse Vogler, an artist and designer whose work sits at the intersection of spatial practices, material culture, and political economy.
And I have no doubt that, as we have seen for the past 5 or 6 weeks, there will be amazing kind of synergies and overlaps relative to our larger questions about the past, the present, and the future. So hopefully it'll be an excellent conversation. We may even have a few surprise guests again drop in and join us. So make sure you tune in for that. But until then, I'm Gabrielle Esperdy in Asbury Park.
And I'm Jimmy Liu, still in Austin, Texas.
Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week. This has been Universal Lunch.